Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Selfish Woman. I have a treat for you today. I'm here with Chloe Caldwell, and Chloe is the author of the national bestseller Women, and her essays have appeared in the New York Times, Vogue, Bon Appetit, The Cut, and more. Chloe's next book, Trying, is coming soon from Grey Wolf, and she lives in Hudson, New York. Welcome, Chloe.
Hi, Val. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm super excited to chat with you. Like I was just saying, I connected with you through Kara, who was my coach a couple years ago,
Oh, cool.
who actually was the one who like challenged me to start a podcast and write a book. So
Amazing.
the
Wow.
the
That's so
connections,
cool. It's like a trifecta of the three of us.
right? Yeah. So I feel like I kind of already know you just from my
Yeah.
connection through Kara. But like I said, I heard you on Kara's podcast about your re-release of the book Women,
Yeah.
and I went right out that day and bought it and proceeded to devour it, and I just love it. So I'd love to just chat with you about all of those things, the book and whatever else.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for buying it. That's so sweet. And Kara like makes just so many connections between her followers and like listeners. So it's cool that that's, how we connected. And I just love the concept of your podcast, like the word selfish and how it's like used against women, but really it's just like self-care. It's just it's so silly how we use that word as an insult.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
truly is. And I think like the reason or the mission for me in this podcast is to redefine selfish for women because myself included, so many of us have been conditioned to be selfless and like,
Mhm.
I'm a good woman, I'm a good wife, or I'm a good mother if I'm selfless. But then we end up being overwhelmed, exhausted, burnt out,
Yeah.
and unhappy. And
Yeah.
so I know for me, when I started actually being selfish, I was like, hey, that just really means full of myself.
Yeah. Right.
uh,
Right.
and realize that like when I prioritize me, and which sounds so basic, but like we have been sort of shamed out of that,
Yeah.
everything kind of changes. And that's one theme that I see in this book really is you sort of going on this journey of learning about yourself and within the concept of a relationship and how to come home to yourself in a sense. Would you say
Yes.
that's something you experienced?
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. I definitely think, I mean, it was written in my late 20s, and I think that's just such a turning point for people. It's like you're not 30 yet, so you feel like you can still kind of like screw around, but like the world does expect you to be an adult, but you don't always have the skills yet of being
Mm,
a true adult, and like taking care of yourself. So I feel like there are themes of selfishness in the book, actually. But what's so wild is just hearing you speak is the first time I just realized, because the way you said it, like, so there's selfless, meaning like no self, and
mm,
then there's selfish, but that's still ish. Like it's like when you say like, oh, meet me at 5-ish, like it's like kind of maybe
mm,
like right around, like kind of in the self. And then there's self-fulfillment. So it's
mhm.
like saying selfish is still ish.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I've just never thought of those words in that sequence before. And I'm like, wow, I want to be more than selfish. I want to be self-fulfilled.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's so crazy.
And
Um,
and what is it like to then consider giving from self-fulfillment as opposed
yeah,
to selfless, right? It's like this abundance, this like I'm
right.
giving
It's like a
because
abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset.
exactly.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is I'm all about lately. But yeah,
Yeah.
in the book, it's interesting. Like it definitely, I think some people do read women and the narrator, I think, as really selfish in the sense that she/I started, was dating someone who was in a relationship. So that already is like a selfish
Hmm.
looking thing to do. And then over time, like that relationship, helped me explore my identity and was like a real turning point for me. But I think instead of externalizing I think through the book, it's like, who am I? What am I? What's my
Mhm.
sexuality? What kind of person should I be with? Like, because the two women in the book, it's like the narrator kind of has no sense of self
Right.
or is figuring it out. And then the older person, Finn, has a really solid sense of self and is in her 40s and knows who she is and the way she dresses. Like, clothes are a lot in the book, like how she dresses, how she presents herself, how she identifies as gay. Um, so I think there's something in that age gap where like the younger person is looking to the older person to be like, can you tell me how
Mm.
to live, really?
Mm, totally. So yeah, so the it's a novella, uh, but it's based on your own life experience. And
Mhm.
I kind of like that you did that instead of like a memoir.
Yeah,
Uh,
I read memoir and personal essay a lot. I love that genre so much. But novella, it was really like an editor who said to me, maybe this is a novella because novellas were these really short novels, and a lot of them are actually based in like love stories. Like if you
mm,
look up like famous novellas, they're usually two people in some kind of love affair. So for some
mm,
reason, that format really spoke to me. And at the time, I don't know if you're familiar with the genre autofiction, but autofiction was becoming popular where it doesn't just translate literally to like autobiographical fiction. It's more of a style. And like Women, the book is very like fragmented and like some pages just have one paragraph. And that's kind of a style of autofiction.
mm,
Um, Sheila Heti does autofiction, Rachel Cusk. Um, so I was really into that style. And what I like about autofiction is it helps the reader, not helps, but makes the reader really engaged because the reader starts to wonder like what's true, what's not true,
right,
and
right.
it like makes it kind of juicy. But yes, I did that. I also, it was my second book. I was still in my 20s and it was it didn't end well. Like it was a pretty torrid love affair and I definitely didn't feel that a memoir was like the right um just the right genre for it and the right
Yeah,
style for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I like the way it's written. And like you said, it's like little short vignettes almost, and
Yes.
then like
Yeah.
little longer pieces. So it's just so easy to pick up and read. So,
Yeah.
all right. So you wrote it 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and this is the re-release, right?
Mhm.
So you're talking about it a lot. What's it like to go back and like revisit that time in your life
It's
from where you
crazy.
are now?
Well, it's crazy because right before I sold it to get reissued, I got divorced from a man. So I like when I wrote it, I was a totally different person. I mean, like
Yeah.
my skills were different. My lens on life was different. And then, I lived my life and dated. I got married, then I got divorced, then the book was getting reissued. And so I felt this sense of like freedom in a way I hadn't felt for a long
Mm,
time because I was out of the role of wife, I think.
hmm.
So the reissue of Women coincided with me dating again for the first time in 7 years and
Right.
living alone. And like my whole life just shifted. Like a lot of the responsibilities I had had when I was married, I didn't have anymore. Like I
Yeah.
was suddenly just in my new apartment. I was like, I'm grocery shopping for one person.
Yeah.
I'm not
Nobody
cleaning.
knows where I am.
Nobody knows where I'm going. Right. The first time I live in upstate New York, the first time I got on the train to go to the city to go on a date, I was like, oh my God, like this is the first time I don't have to tell anybody where I'm going in a really long time. So I think it was really good for me.
Hmm.
It brought back that sense of youth and agency and kind of like, oh wow, I get to kind of start from scratch. Like I get to create my life again.
Yeah.
So it was really beautiful. And I wonder how it would have worked if I had still been in my marriage and the book got reissued. It's almost like I couldn't have both. Like in a spirit,
Yeah.
in a spiritual sense, I'm like, this was all meant to happen. And the
The perfect
divorce,
unfolding.
yeah, and the divorce, obviously there was grief and it was, really challenging, but ultimately in the long run was the right thing and my life actually
Mm.
got a lot better. Um,
Hmm.
and people don't talk about that a lot. Like I actually
Mhm.
started to feel really joyful when I got divorced.
Yeah.
um Obviously there's sadness. Obviously it's like totally weird, but like I really would be lying if I didn't also admit that like I felt better.
But isn't that like a confirmation that you've done the right thing? I've been divorced twice. We
Oh,
have a
cool.
big divorce
Okay.
community here.
Okay, you get it.
So we get it. And yeah, like as much as it's hard and you have to grieve and you have to go through that uncoupling or unraveling,
Yeah.
when you feel that joy, that sense of freedom, that sense of excitement that like I can reinvent myself, this is an opportunity. It's like I feel as though that is the confirmation, like, okay, like I did the
Mhm.
right thing, I'm on the right path. And I know for me, like both of my divorces, as much as they were hard, both me and my ex are happier now on the other side
Uh-huh.
of that, you know?
Yeah.
So it is, it's I think we're also reinventing what divorce means for women and how we walk that through. And it's not this shameful failure that we've been told it is.
Right. I felt that at first. When I first learned I wanted to divorce, I was kind of like, are you serious? Like
Mm.
I have to like I had like 2 days. It went, I moved through things pretty quickly, I think, because it like there were like 2 days where I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm a divorced person. Like what a failure. And I have to meet someone again. Like I was like, I thought that part of my life was over. Like, and I was really like, I couldn't believe it. And then it like, I don't know if it was like as soon as I got into my new apartment or like what it was, but suddenly I was like, wait, this is fun. Like I was like,
Right.
and it's funny because I had been watching, I think it was foreshadowing. I had been watching other women divorce.
Mm.
And like on Instagram, they would announce, their divorces. And one person in particular, she was a past writing student of mine and now a friend. She wrote a caption, you'll like this. She wrote, Nora Ephron, the writer, always said, don't marry a man you wouldn't want to be divorced from. And then she said, Paul and I are going our separate ways. We're calling it phase two of our relationship instead of the end. It's phase two.
Right.
And
I
we're
love
still
that.
co-parenting the dog. And then she wrote, in short, I'm gay. And I was like, this is hilarious. Like, I was like,
I love that.
I showed my mom because my mom's divorced. And when my mom divorced, it was in the 90s.
Mm.
So total shame, right?
Hmm.
I was like, Mom, look at how people announce their divorces now. It's like
Yeah.
this joyful thing. And I was kind of jealous of my student. I remember seeing that and being like, huh, that looks cool.
Yeah, I like that.
and then and then it happened to me a year later. So um
Yeah.
I do, it's been a year out. And another great quote about divorce. I was talking with someone who 2 years ago got divorced, and I was talking about how my first year after being divorced was sort of crazy. And he said, the first year after divorce is like being at the airport. Anything goes. You can do it.
I love that. Have a drink at 7 a.m. Nobody
Right.
cares.
It's like unaccounted for. It
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
does. And I was like, that is actually the most real thing I have ever heard.
It's so true.
Um, yeah,
One of the Kate Anthony I've had on my podcast twice, she just published her book called The D Word, all about divorce.
cool. I've
She's a
heard of it.
divorce coach. And
Mm.
one of the things she said after her divorce is her therapist said, basically, I want you to think of yourself as crazy for the next year.
Oh,
Like, just assume that you're crazy. And she's
assume.
like, it's
Yeah.
so true. You kind of go crazy. You
Yeah.
kind of have this extravagant permission to just
Yes.
do whatever and like
Extravagant
have grace for
permission.
yourself.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
Um,
But going back to this theme of like reinvention,
yeah.
identity, I wanted to just pull one quote out of your book that I loved. And it's near the
Mhm.
beginning. You said, I figured if I was going to be with a woman, I would have been with one by now. And
Right.
I love that
Yeah.
because I can really relate to that. But I'm curious, like for you, looking back,
Hmm.
what was that like to be like in your late 20s? I'm guessing you assumed you were straight and
Yeah.
then having this kind of awakening. Like how open were you to it? What was that like?
Mm. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. I mean, look, now that I'm 38, I look back and I'm like, wow, why were you putting so much pressure on yourself to
Mm,
know? Like, that's still really young.
mhm.
But at the time, I felt like pressure or like, wow, really? I'm that non-self-aware? Like, I'm a writer. How would I not be in touch with myself? Um, and I was really down on myself for feeling late and feeling like older than other people. And why didn't I figure this out when I was 21, like living in Brooklyn? Like,
Right.
really, this never came up until I was 26, 27. And
Mhm.
I think I was open to it for sure. However, it really did, I think, mess with who I thought I was. And I think part of that too was that our language around being queer was different even then.
Right.
So we weren't throwing around the word queer, and like the word bi was always kind of like frowned upon.
Mhm.
As my friend says, back then in the 90s and 2000s, when you told someone you were bi, they just saw it as like hypersexual. Like they're just like, oh,
Right.
so you have sex with anybody. It's like, no.
You
Like,
can do three sins.
yeah.
That's what they thought of as bi, right?
Yeah. And then there was like the Sex and the City episode where like being bi was so horrible and
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
yeah, and that's all I had. Like that
Yeah.
one episode. I bring that up because I have a friend in her 20s is watching Sex and the City for the first time, and she was texting me and she was like, I'm watching the episode where Carrie dates someone bi and it's so made fun of and like
Mm-hmm.
shamed. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, that was my only resource at the
Right.
time. Like
Right.
a person. It's so sad. So I think it wouldn't have happened today. And also people use pansexual now, which means like you're just attracted to someone's inner person to person, which is
Yeah.
how I always felt. But it shows how important language is because I didn't have the language for it. So I was really stuck of like, okay, maybe I'm bi, but everyone makes fun of that and or doesn't believe me.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, am I gay? Well, I'm definitely not straight, but am I gay enough? Like that's a whole other thing.
Right.
So it's so wild because I wrote that book because I was, so heartbroken from the experience and from the breakup. I wrote that book and then I put it out. And then I kind of like went back in the closet because I was like felt really exposed with the book and I didn't really have a relationship with a woman again after that. So I was like, well, and I think I still had so much like internalized shame.
Sure.
So then so I just kind of like went back in the closet and then, married a man, which, I had fallen in love with him. But now, like to your question, now I have a lot of grief because I we call it now the second like the queer adolescence. Like I never got to have the queer adolescence or be a teenager and know that I was queer or even
Mm-hmm.
like in my early 20s. And so what happened after my divorce last summer was I was kind of living that out and like to your point, like I was kind of crazy and like dating a lot and
Mm-hmm.
feeling and maybe acting more immature and feeling like stunted in that way and kind of jealous of like younger people who are able
Right.
to
Right.
just be like, hey, I'm 14, I'm queer, like I look
Yeah.
queer, I'm dating a girl, and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't get to have that, and now I'm like pushing 40. So better late than never, but there is grief to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I don't know what to call it, but there are so many women in particular, I think, that are coming out later in life.
Yeah, there's
And
an article in the New York Times like 2 weeks ago that says like the late in life lesbian, and it's a whole article about this. But
yeah.
these women are in their 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, I loved that acknowledgement, I think, in the book
Hmm.
of like, I should know by now, I'm
Yeah,
self-aware, but then still allowing
life can
yourself to just
surprise you.
explore and have that experience anyways to find out. That takes guts.
Yeah, although yeah, now I have the guts, but when I put women out, like I said, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. And my writing has been so exposing. Like I had put out a book before women that came out when I was 26. Women came out when I was 28. And my first book called Legs Get Led Astray is like totally raw personal essays.
Yeah.
So I was like publishing personal essays all over the place. Then I had women out. So I think I felt very like, okay, I have all this stuff out here. Now I'm gonna kind of like go back in because I
Yeah.
didn't feel I wasn't ready. So I kind of
Mm,
respect that now. I'm like, I sort of trust the life process now in ways that
mm,
I didn't,
mhm.
because now I feel like I got here and like, sure, maybe my life would have been, I don't know, quote, better if I had just come out when I was 28. But I kind of respect that, like, we're ready when we're ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
have a lot
agree.
of friends in my like in their 30s, 40s kind of coming out. So I think it's so common, like you're saying, that I don't really feel alone
Hmm.
in it anymore, which is funny because in my 20s I was way younger, but I felt more alone then.
Hmm.
I think it's because people were talking about stuff less because that was in 2013.
We have
But now I
TikTok
have a
now. We're all
whole,
talking about it.
right. I have so many friends like divorcing and then dating women. It seems like pretty common, so
Yeah,
it's kind of beautiful in that
it
way.
is. It really is.
Yeah.
And I like the way that you write about this relationship. One of the things I like, it reminds me of, have you seen that movie Am I Okay that just came out with,
Yes, I saw it.
yeah.
Yep.
One of the things about that movie, which was so sweet, but like the ending is so ambiguous, right? Like she's
Yeah.
going to the airport. Is she going to be with her friend? What's happening? You don't have any resolution. And that's a little bit like how this story ends. There isn't like a clean ending.
Right.
And also the breakup is messy, right? It's like in and out, back and forth, and it kind of like seems to drag on a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
And I think like I can so relate to those concepts of like, okay, like, oh, are we talking again? Oh, okay. And then wait, you're coming over, like, and feeling a little bit of like shame around that of like, no, like you're going to end it, you end it.
Right.
But I like sort of the permission you gave yourself to just like have that be what it was.
Yeah. God, that's funny. The breakup is like the whole book.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's like I mean, I don't think it's only queer, but I think it's definitely like, it definitely more so sometimes in the queer world of like, okay, we're broken up. Do you want to go have dinner? Like it's really funny and it makes sense because we're emotional, and we're like loving and vulnerable and like smart people. Like women are, very
Yeah.
emotionally intelligent. So it makes sense. So I like that you appreciated that.
Hmm.
It's funny how some relationships are like that though, where they're like the breakup is like torturous,
Hmm.
and then some are clean. Like my divorce was like we just never saw each other again. Like it was so easy. And I'm like, how was my divorce easier than like some of these like 3-month relationships?
That's hilarious. That's wild, right? Like my second divorce, we were separated for a year, living
Uh-huh.
in different countries and then living like 4 blocks from each other and
Oh,
trying to work on it and like, are we together? Aren't we? And he was kind of waiting for me to decide. And I took a whole year to figure that
uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's wild. So what years were your divorces in?
So my first one was 2013,
Mhm.
and that was after like 24 years of marriage and 3 kids.
Mhm. Oh,
And then
wow.
the second one, we were
You
only
said
married.
24 years of marriage?
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. And then the second one, we'd only been married 2 years. But then I took that extra year just to be sure.
Just of
Uh, so
course.
so I guess like I'm shortening my, how long I was saying to my therapist, like kind of like beating myself up about
Yeah.
my patterns. And she's like,
Mm.
and also I just went through another breakup recently. And she
Mhm.
said, but can you see that like it's taking you less time to
Yeah.
identify and then take action? I was like, okay, yes, I can see that.
Yeah. That's so funny. We're similar. My therapist said the same thing to me of like, yeah, you're getting faster
Yeah.
at knowing. And I don't know, it seems like in another world, I could look at this year and be like, oh, I dated two people and broke up and had a divorce. But like, there's something about it that was totally growing pains and
Yeah.
something I needed to do. And I
Hmm.
just feel that they made me more resilient and also more clear on who I am and what I want. Like it was really
Hmm.
good for me to date and have these breakups because it gave me a lot of information. Um,
Totally. I remember when I was dating, like after my second divorce, so like this was 2021.
mhm,
And I was like, okay, I'm ready. But I also knew I'd never been dumped. Like I was always the one to end things. And I was
mhm.
like, I actually feel like I need to experience rejection. So I'm not
Yeah.
afraid of it. And so be careful what you ask for because like everyone dumped me that year.
Oh, wow, the year of being
The
dumped. You
year
should
of
write
being
that.
dumped. But it
Yeah,
was good because it was like a low stakes way to experience rejection. Cause like,
sure,
we dated for a couple months,
sure.
whatever,
You're
you
not
know.
as attached.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then I realized like I didn't die, like I survived and it's a
yeah,
blow to my ego, but I'm fine. And it helped me to just not be so afraid of it.
right. Absolutely. Well, that's how I feel about divorce as a whole because my parents divorced and I was really paranoid about divorce for a long time. Like when I met my ex-husband, I was like, I don't want to get divorced. And I was like really scared of commitment because I was scared of divorce. And that's
Mm.
why it's funny that I ended up here. However, it's meant to be. It's almost like exposure therapy. Like it's
Right.
like, oh, you're scared of divorce. And then I went through and I'm like, oh, I'm fine. Like,
Right.
oh, wow, I didn't die from that. I didn't die of humiliation, heartbreak, grief, anything. Like, I'm
Mhm.
actually feeling good. So, I think that that is an enormous lesson. Like, the thing I most feared, I completely got through, and I got through it kind of like surviving and thriving. You know what I mean? Um,
Totally,
yeah,
totally. The fear that keeps us in shitty situations or with shitty people because we're so afraid of something like divorce. It's like once you finally face it, yeah, it's hard, but you come out the other side and you're like, okay, not only did I not die, yeah, I'm a
right.
better person because of it too.
Right. I like built character. I see the world more like nuanced. It's kind of beautiful. Um,
Hmm.
what advice would you have for me on my first I just went through the first year of like not being I just finalized my divorce papers like 2 weeks ago. So like
Congratulations.
what advice would you give me?
About what?
I don't know, just being like
Life?
being new to being divorced, like
Yeah.
going out in the world.
Yeah. What
And
I would say is just extravagant permission. Like
this is
there's
my second
no,
year. Like I did that last year, extravagant permission.
yeah, and there's no rules, right? So
Okay.
it's like if you want to date,
Yeah.
like there's no perfect time. You're going to learn
Mhm.
a lesson. But I think really like after the first year and into the second year, what I find is it's like, okay, now who do I want to be? Who am I becoming?
Yeah.
And who do I want to be? And is now this is an opportunity to reinvent myself and really like look at, actually this reminds me of another thing you said in the book, which I wanted to quote. When you were going through your breakup, you said, eventually it becomes obvious to me that I've stopped living and started killing time.
Yes.
I was like, oh my God, like I can so relate to that feeling of like, I'm just putting in my time because nothing's
Yes.
interesting. And it's
Yes.
like, you've got to get out of that at some point, right? And get into like, okay, what's my new adventure? What's my new
Yeah.
challenge? Who am I becoming? And
Yeah.
just like, yeah, like I feel like you're doing all the things that you
Yeah.
need to be doing.
Yeah, that line is really that line pops into my head sometimes, but I don't luckily since then I haven't really felt that way. Like that was a really dark it's a really dark time for me.
Hmm.
It's really actually wild how much that situation and like finding my queerness and having this like as they call it queer yearning, you know, how painful it was. And I
Mm,
think also it speaks to support systems.
mm,
Like I have so much support now, but not then. Like now
mhm,
I'm like, I'm a published writer. I have so many writer friends. I have so many other friends. I have like the writing community. I have tons of queer people in my life. I
mm.
none of that. So I really think that's what makes the difference, because when I went through this divorce, which was really surprising and like out of nowhere, and like I was okay because I had community. Like my friends like helped me move immediately, and they kind of made it a party. And
Right.
we were going out. We went out to dinner after. It was like the most fun day.
Wow.
And I was going through horrendous grief and change, but it was such a I'm almost nostalgic for like last summer. I'm like, that
Mm.
was fun. And whereas I think about women and that breakup and how shattering it was, and this depression I fell into because I wasn't talking to anybody. I didn't have anybody to talk to. So
Wow. I
that's kind of
love that.
interesting. Yeah, it's like I have built a life for myself where now if something happens, I have people to lean on.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And you've done, in the last 10 years, you've done so much work on yourself.
right.
You've
Yeah,
grown so much also. So you're, I'm sure, much more resilient. But the point of support and community is huge. And like, I know
yeah,
so many of my community and listeners are going through divorces, and I'm sure they can relate to what I just quoted out of your book, that feeling of
yeah,
like, there's nothing that matters. I'm just killing time. Like, when is this going to end? And so I love that you tied it back to support, because that's what we can all do, right? Is like,
yeah.
if you don't have that, then find it.
Create
Like,
it somehow. Yeah,
exactly. Whether it's like join a Facebook group or join a running club, or like
yeah,
find your people like you did
yeah,
with your writer friends, so that you don't feel alone.
exactly.
And I know I felt very alone going through my first divorce. And in my second divorce, it was very different, but I was actually choosing to be alone because I knew I needed like solitude. It was also the
Mhm.
pandemic. And I was like, I'm going to go deep into myself. And I did like a whole year of inner work and
Ooh,
isolation and healing. And it like changed everything on every level when I came out of that
whoa,
year.
that's
So
awesome.
I think, yeah, like it's sort of like you know what you need when you need it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's being out and dating, and sometimes it's being going inward. Wow, that year sounds really beautiful. It reminds me of a book that's coming out. I hope it comes out soon. I think it's called I think it's called like My Year of Celibacy. No, it's called something. And then the
Yeah.
subtitle is My Year of Celibacy, but it's by
Right.
a fantastic author who was a teacher of mine, Melissa Febos. She
Mm-hmm.
wrote a book called Abandon Me, a memoir called Abandon Me,
Mm.
about a kind of like toxic relationship with a woman and also searching for her father. I think you would really like it. It's
Writing
like
that down.
connected essays on the theme of abandonment. Um, but she did like celibacy for a year, and that's her next book.
That's
And
hilarious.
I
Because
know,
that's what my book is about.
no way. I
Yeah.
kind of, when you said that 1 year, I was thinking like, was
My
it
book
celibate?
is
Yeah.
called The Selfish Year.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah, so and that's exciting. So yeah, my book
Yes,
is
this is
all
a
about,
thing people are starting to talk about.
yeah. And like I was living in Spain with my husband, and we were expats for 2 years, and then I left our brand new apartment. We just bought like a historical apartment in Valencia and restored it. Lived there 3 months, and then I was like, I'm out of here. I bought a one-way ticket, came back to Canada, and then spent a year in alone. And that's what changed everything in my life, really.
Oh,
So now I have the support, the community, but then it was like, what I actually need is just to fucking be with myself.
absolutely. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
feel that so hard. Oh my God. I like fantasize about that. And like, luckily for me, like, I get a lot of that just being what I do for work. And like, I don't
Mhm.
have kids. So I get a lot of alone time, but it's so important, especially after divorce. My friend, another person who's getting divorced, she also did a year of celibacy many, many years ago. And through that year of celibacy was how she actually realized that she only thought about women and that she was gay, like
Yep.
because of celibacy. So
Yep.
I thought that was super interesting. But she's divorcing a man, and she has a long-term girlfriend, and she has two little kids,
Oh,
and
wow.
going through it. And when I talked to her the other day, she's like, I so desperately want to be alone. Like, I have not had 1 second to myself in probably months. And like, it actually does make you crazy, you
Yep.
know?
Yeah.
So yeah, she's really, really going through the depths of it. It's just, it's so hard.
Yeah. And especially I
You
think
went
it's,
through what you went through, right?
yeah. and as women, we're so conditioned as to just like, especially if you have children
Yeah,
or, you know, in a relationship, to just like abandon ourselves for everybody else. And
exactly.
it just erodes our sense of self to the point where then you just forget who you are. And that takes so much time to rebuild.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree. And solitude is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, what is that quote? Every human's greatest fear is sitting in a room by themselves
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something.
And now with phones and everything, yeah, it's insane.
Yeah,
But books are so like healing. Like I don't know about you, I love reading like divorce memoirs and breakup books and stuff
I
like
do
that.
too.
I think that they're so soothing. So yeah,
And
it
it
makes sense.
reminds us that
Go ahead.
like we're not alone. I think when you're going through it, it's like I'm the only one who's ever gone through this or feeling this pain. And then you realize like, oh, there's so many other people doing this, walking this out, going through this, and you know, it's all going to
Yeah,
be okay.
that's what's so wild about my book Women, because it was a really tiny book on a really tiny press. And I really thought, because like I said, it wasn't talking to people and I didn't have queer friends. So I didn't know that it was a relatable or universal experience, which is like, obviously it is. It's a, all it is a breakup. But there were a lot of other layers to it of like the age difference and identity and
Yeah.
sexuality. So I think that that's been like one of the biggest gifts in my life, that book, like that I wrote
Mm.
it from this place of pain
Mhm.
and total isolation. And then I found so much connection through it. I mean, people write to me about it all the time. Now I'm doing a class called Write Your Queer Breakup. I got
I love
22
it.
people signing up in one day. So I was like,
Whoa.
oh wow, like people are really going through it and want to write about their their breakup, similar to, probably if it's like write about your divorce.
Yeah.
So it's just been a really writing is amazing. This is what I keep thinking, because I'm like, wow, I wrote something, I put the energy out, and then like later it came back to me. So it's just so things don't have to be so like instant gratification how we all
Yeah.
think. Yeah,
Well, look at that. Yeah. 10 years later,
it's a
it's
long game.
it's come back around.
Yeah,
And I love when you can see like the connection points in your life.
yeah.
Like if you hadn't chosen to jump into that relationship,
I wouldn't have the book.
you
And
would, yeah.
and also I had taken a leap by moving. I live on the East Coast and I moved to the West Coast, and that's where I met the Finn character. And that was another leap I took in my life. I moved out there to go do like a yoga teacher training, and I was kind of like, I don't know, just kind of not living like the healthiest lifestyle in New York. And I put myself in a healthier
Mm-hmm.
position, met
Mm-hmm.
her, wrote about it, and now it's having these like, it has a ripple effect. I
Okay,
think
I'm
all
loving that.
creative stuff that we put out has a ripple effect like that.
It
Like
does.
someone could read your book and it could like change everything for them. You might not always know,
Exactly.
but
You don't
it
know.
happens
But
because
what
it's all.
I love where that's going because it's like if you hadn't been willing to take a chance and try something that
Mm,
maybe felt risky or new or scary and then your experience was heartbreaking and painful, but because you were willing to go through that and have that experience, it's changed your life, it's changed so many other people's lives. And I think like that's such a great message for us to take away is like just because something didn't work out, just because you
right.
got divorced or just because it was shitty does
100%.
not mean that there isn't like a bigger lesson or an impact from that.
That's
That
such
can,
a good point. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
And that's why sometimes when people describe the book and they're like, oh, it was like this toxic relationship, I'm like, was it? Like, I think it was just two people who couldn't figure this out, like who
mm-hmm,
have this connection with each other. I wouldn't call it like a toxic or abusive or anything like that. I really
mm-hmm.
wouldn't. Um, and I probably have rose-colored glasses on now since I'm so far away from it, but I'm like, no, that was a good year in my life. But in ways it was because, like you're saying, it ended up shaping my life. And this wasn't even a long relationship. I mean, we probably were actually only seeing each other, having this affair for what, 4 or 5 months. The rest of
Right.
it, I'm saying, in the beginning we were friends. And then after we were having this breakup for like 6 months. So
Yeah.
like, it wasn't, things don't have to be these like long, long-term things that we look at in our culture as successful.
Yeah.
Um, but why? Like you were saying before, maybe if you don't want to be in that and you're in it, that's not success just because it's long.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think like just asking ourselves like what has value, and sometimes those shorter relationships they have a lot of value in a different way.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And yeah, like reading women, I didn't see it as a toxic relationship either. I saw it as like, here's two people being messy, being human, having an experience in the best way they know how. And your experience was the way you wrote about it was just so raw and real that it was like, yeah, this is love. It's messy and it doesn't
Yeah.
always look perfect, as it's not always the Instagram picture. This is
Right.
what really is going on.
Right. Like it's not always just two people who fall in love and get married. And like, when is that? I just think our culture is so obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And I feel like lately, like, and like what you're doing, Karen, like everybody, it's just like taking that myth away and starting
Hmm.
to be like, here's what's real, like here's what's underneath all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and it's good for everybody, because then hopefully people put less pressure on themselves to have this perfect
Right.
relationship, which we all know isn't a thing.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And I think like movies don't do us any favor. Disney doesn't do us any favor. Like,
Yeah, not at
and then we're
all.
sitting in shame because we're, feeling like we're not doing it perfect. But yeah, that's why we need more voices because I like this, because it's like normalizing having an experience, letting yourself feel it, finding the growth or the lesson,
Yeah.
and taking it for what it is, which is ultimately a connection point to everything else in your life.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you can either take that lesson and allow it to help you to grow, or you can just be like, well, now I'm bitter and cynical. And like, you get to choose,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
obviously you chosen to make this something beautiful.
Yeah, and I had, I didn't do it for any other reason other than self-expression. And that's,
Mm.
it's just what I really love about writing. I think more people should just be like writing everything down. Even if it like just even journaling, I think it's like just it's so good for you and the brain, and
Yeah,
like it holds you accountable to yourself in a way.
totally.
And it helps you like see your own patterns, because when you're, because you just wrote this book, like when you're writing about your life, you can't hide from anything,
Mm-hmm.
including like how you participated in
Mm-hmm.
XYZ. So I just, yeah, I think writing is just like such a gift.
It truly is. Like, I mean, I've been journaling forever, but that selfish year, I journaled every day for that year. And when I
Cool.
look back on it, it's crazy. I'm like, who was that? Like, I feel like such a different
Why?
person.
Like what did it say?
Well, just like when I was in the just leaving stage, I was
Yeah.
so consumed. And what I realized later was I was in an emotionally abusive relationship, but I didn't know it at the time. So now from my place of clarity,
Yeah.
reading my journal, I'm like, who is this person? It just felt
Wow.
so sad to me that I was so like blinded and
Yes.
obsessed with like everything that he was doing and he was
Yeah.
saying, but I also got to witness my journey of like awakening and understanding and healing,
Wow. Yeah, that's
which is so
beautiful.
powerful to be able to go back because you don't remember those little moments of every
No.
day. So
Right. And
writing it
once we
down
get
is,
better, or like you said, like once we're like awake, we kind of forget, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean of when like if you're with someone like that, or like emotionally abusive, and then you give all your power away, like you're
Hmm.
saying, you're just so consumed by that person,
Yeah.
that must be really jarring to see. Now that after you went through your selfish year where you're like focusing
Yeah.
on yourself,
Yeah.
that's a wild like
Yeah, it's
juxtaposition.
crazy. And now, like, I have a Substack now. So I write a lot there on just like
Awesome.
just relationship stuff. And yeah,
Yeah.
like I really love, like you said, just writing down our experiences and owning our own shit too, right? Being like, oh yeah, like this is my pattern. This is how that showed up. And
Yeah.
writing it for yourself, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's the only way is like write it for yourself and then later or like not even later, like write it for yourself and it will find people who connect with it.
Yeah,
Um, instead of thinking about other people when you go to
exactly.
write is like poison. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So
Yeah.
you have a new book coming out?
Yeah. So I I have a book coming out next August, so
Yeah.
about a year from now. It's sort of interesting because I sold it under, I mean, I had a draft, but and it was about trying to conceive and get pregnant.
Mm,
And then, and like I sold it and I was writing it, and it was kind of on, it's like riffing on trying and what the word trying
mm,
means.
love that.
But then I got divorced while writing the book. So then my editor and I had to like be like, huh, how should we handle this? So now it's really like something I've never written before. It's probably such a weird book because it's like part one is about trying, and then there's a big explosion in my life. My life blows up, and then it's like the book becomes queer. Like then I kind of like come out and come queer, and I'm still like trying or thinking about creating a family, but through
Yeah,
the lens of being queer.
right.
And so me not getting pregnant with my ex-husband ended up being a gift because
Mm.
yeah. So
Mhm.
so it's like and I really wanted to put a memoir or like a nonfiction book out where someone didn't get pregnant at the end,
Right.
because every book on infertility or fertility or anything on motherhood is the arc of we couldn't get pregnant and then I did IVF and then I got pregnant, and I
Oh,
wanted to put out another narrative
yeah.
that wasn't that and didn't that doesn't have IVF in it.
Yeah.
It has some medical intervention, but it doesn't have IVF. So that was just something that I was looking for, like at bookstores, and
Mm.
didn't really exist.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for that. That's next
Thank
year.
you.
But this is the year of women,
This
right?
is the year of women. That's why I've been like pushing women and doing events. Like women has been such a big party, like frivolous, like queer
Yeah.
dance parties and like all these fun readings. And then I'm like, well, I have to do this because my next book is kind of dark. So I'm like, I've been having so much fun with women, which just feels just like real. I mean, it's obviously it's a breakup, so like sure, parts of it are sad, but
Yeah.
it's at the end of the day, like what I've been through since is like more challenging in a different way.
Yeah.
So celebrating women has been really, really, really fun.
That's amazing. So yeah, I mean, you can find it everywhere. I
Yeah,
found
find
I
your
got
local
mine at
bookstore.
Chapters. It was right there. And
Nice.
yeah, everyone go buy your copy of Women, read it. You'll love it. And I found it very healing for myself
Oh,
personally.
that's so nice.
And
Thank
so
you
it was
so much.
just a beautiful book. So thanks for hanging out with me today, Chloe.
Thank you for having me. I cannot wait to read your Selfish Year. It sounds really good.
Yes, very soon, hopefully. All right. Thanks, Chloe. And thanks everybody for being
Yeah.
here. We will see you
Bye.
next time. Bye.